In the last canto, we had a line and stopped the mute march of necessity. And I explained necessity more in the common way, but here Sri Aurobindo has capitalized the N. And I've spoken with people, one man in the ashram, and we agree that necessity here means karma. So it stopped the mute march of karma. That's how powerful Savitri was. So we begin a new canto now, Canto 3, and it's a very lengthy canto and very important one because it introduces us to some of the hidden greatness of Sri Aurobindo in the character of Ashwapati, who is the Lord of the Horse, Savitri's human father. He is also the Lord of Tapasya, which is the concentrated energy of spiritual endeavor that helps us to rise from the mortal to the immortal planes. And this was listed by the archives in the ashram as an author's note, as the author's note, and it occurs in the very beginning. But Sri Aurobindo never wrote it as an author's note. It's part of a long letter that he wrote to a disciple. So it's very important that we remember this, because in the very beginning, he tells us the characters are not just symbols, but they're actually incarnations who can come to the earth, and they are on the earth now to help us in our sadhana. So Ashwapati is here now, perhaps in the guise of Sri Aurobindo. Savitri, of course, is here. So we'll begin. This is a very interesting beginning. A world's desire compelled her mortal birth. Well, this is the first line of the canto, and after that, it's not about Savitri anymore, it's about us. Very interesting that he puts the first line that way. Some people often wonder why Sri Aurobindo and Mother came to the world when it's in such a turmoil. They ask, did they come prematurely? This is just mental speculation, for they are self-chosen, and they chose to come here now because they saw the possibility, at that time it was only a possibility, of a leap into a higher consciousness, which Sri Aurobindo termed the supermental. And look at how many years they had to work on it. I mean, Sri Aurobindo leaves in 1950. He puts his body in the earth to be this strong foundation, but Mother has to work for 23 years more on the supermental. First of all, there's 1956, when she breaks through that golden door and the supermental light floods on the earth. So we have all these things telling us Mother did everything and more than she had to do in this incarnation. She and Sri Aurobindo are now both in the subtle physical realm, building the supermental body. And many people have seen her there, and him. So, then he begins, one in front of the immemorial quest. An immemorial quest is a timeless, ancient quest, extending back far beyond memory. Now, I just want to say a few of my words. Sri Aurobindo, who was so humble that he rarely would speak of himself, very rarely, almost always in the third person, we. But once in a while, he will say I. And you know that is very powerful. So he, even to his closest disciples, and even in his letters, we could barely get a glimpse of him. He was against anyone writing a biography on him, because he said his life was not on the surface for men to see. And yet they wrote many biographies. But that's humanity. But here is the most powerful thing. He reveals himself in Savitri, almost fully. His avataric work, his experiences and realizations, and some facets of his inner life. And that's what we're going to get in Canto 3 and in Canto 5. Sri Aurobindo, we can say, just using Ashwapati to express his own realizations. Now, we do have the record of yoga, which I have not read as yet, which Sri Aurobindo did not want printed, but it was found in a cabinet and they printed it, which is okay.
Why didn't he want it printed?
You see, in the record of yoga, he goes through all of these experiments, all of the failures, and the very few successes. And he keeps going higher and higher. And even we get in this first canto that he has to fall back sometimes. That power is so great that he can't hold it. We're going to hear those lines in Savitri. So, we'll begin. One in front of the immemorial quest, protagonist of the mysterious play, in which the unknown pursues himself through forms and limits his eternity by the hours, and the blind void struggles to live and see. A thinker and toiler in the ideal's air, brought down to earth's dumb need her radiant power. Well, that's one long line, and it's all Sri Aurobindo. He is the one who is in the front of this immemorial quest. And no one else has gotten there. Raman Maharshi, Ramakrishna, Buddha, all of them did not see the possibility of the supermental, the possibility of our leap from the spiritual planes of consciousness, higher mind, illumined mind, intuitive mind, overmind, into the fourth plane, third plane, the supermind. And Mother said, even when we get there, there's still Satchidananda and a long way to go. The evolution will never stop, she tells us. So, one in the front of the immemorial quest, protagonist of the mysterious play. The protagonist here is the main character. It's Sri Aurobindo, in the words of Ashwapati, in which the unknown pursues himself through forms. When the unknown is in the transcendent sphere, there is no movement. Everything is perfection, total silence, inexplicable. But when he decides to pursue himself through forms, he comes down and limits his qualities to be able to fill these billions of souls with life, body, and mind. So now we see that the unknown, and I have to quote a little bit from the Life Divine here, because it's extremely important. Notice that he capitalizes the U of unknown. So it's not a word that we can just define. And Sri Aurobindo has pages about the unknown. I'm only going to read one from the Life Divine. The unknown is not the unknowable. It need not remain the unknown for us, unless we choose ignorance or persist in our first limitations. For to all things that are not unknowable, all things in the universe, there correspond in that universe faculties which can take cognizance of them. And in man, the microcosm, these faculties are always existent and at a certain stage capable of development. We may choose not to develop them. We may choose where they are partially developed, we may discourage and impose on them a kind of atrophy. But fundamentally, all possible knowledge is knowledge within the power of humanity. And the unknown is that which is beyond the known. And though unknown is not unknowable if we can enlarge our faculties or attain to others that we do not yet possess. That's from the Upanishads. In this great play of the divine, who casts himself into forms, animal, man, plant, a grain of sand, all these forms are him alone, as he dwells also in each of us, even in the crudest human being, the highest in the evolutionary climb to date. I once asked Amal, what would Hitler be in his next incarnation? And Amal said, maybe a little better Hitler. It's a very interesting statement. No one is totally damned, ever. There is the phrase in Sanskrit, utkata karma, and it means a karma that cannot be erased. And we understand it as two things, suicide or murder. So that karma has to be gone through again and again until it is cleared out in body, birth and death, and birth and death. Other karmas, Mother could take away immediately if we're sincere enough. In which the unknown pursues himself through forms and limits his eternity by the hours. And the blind void struggles to live and see. In his letters on yoga, he has a couple of statements on this void, which here he capitalizes. The void is the condition of the self, free, wide, and silent. It seems void to the mind, but in reality, it is simply a state of pure existence and consciousness, sat and chit with shanti. Then, in another letter on yoga, which is very interesting, by void is meant emptiness clear of all contents, except existence pure and simple. Without that, one cannot realize the silent Brahman. A thinker and toiler in the ideal's air, brought down to earth's dumb need her radiant power. So, now we know that Sri Aurobindo took the symbol from the Mahabharata of this great yogi, sage, who prays to the divine for a daughter because he has no offspring. Here, we'll see in later cantos where Sri Aurobindo prays to the divine to bring down one who can transform this world. And we know that Savitri is the daughter of the sun, the one who comes to save. He tells us this in the very beginning. So the thinker and toiler is Ashwapati Sri Aurobindo. Brought down to earth's dumb need her radiant power. Now, I've spoken to some of you about dumb before, but we should have it again for the new people. I wrote to Amal. I would meet with him regularly. You know, he lived to be 106 years old. And he would see me. I would go up to his room. He had his own room. And, you know, he was a humorous fellow, very humorous. One day he starts screaming out, "I want to die! I want to die!" And the doctors come running and they say, "You're a sadhak. You're Sri Aurobindo's disciple." He says, "I want to dye my hair." Oh, God. Anyway, I meet with him very regularly, and he answered hundreds and hundreds of questions in his own handwriting. So, there are two definitions in the dictionary of dumb. One is lacking the power of speech, and two is producing no sound, silent, mute. And Amal writes to me, "You are right in saying that Sri Aurobindo uses the word dumb in the sense of mute, but never as stupid or lacking in intelligence. I think the latter usage is more slang than literature." So dumb in Savitri is always mute or silent. Brought down to earth's dumb need her radiant power. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres. It can only be the Avatar, who has come down to earth from the eternal realms, the larger spheres. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres into our province of ephemeral sight. Now, you know, a province is a sphere or a field of activity. So he comes down into this earth as the Avatar to change it, to bring a new consciousness that was not there. We've had many, many great avatars. And Christ in Europe certainly brought down love to the world. And Buddha brought compassion. The Buddhists do not adhere to Buddha's saying. Yes, he did, and many Buddhists have gone into the spiritual realms and merged with the divine and felt no need to come back. It was perfection. For them it was perfection. This world of toil and anger and pain and grief, they didn't want any part of that. For the first time, it is only Sri Aurobindo who says, once reaching those heights, we must come down and bring a life divine on this earth. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres into our province of ephemeral sight, a colonist from immortality. Certainly he and Mother are colonists from the immortal regions, even above the supermind. Now, what actually is a colonist here? Well, I would say someone who begins a colony, someone who is a pointing beam, which we get in the next line. So they are speaking, Sri Aurobindo here is speaking specifically of himself. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres into our province of ephemeral sight. Ephemeral, of course, is transient. A pointing beam on earth's uncertain roads. His birth held up a symbol and a sign. Of course, he speaks of Savitri as being a legend and a symbol. And Savitri is filled with symbols. But the symbol here is Sri Aurobindo, the pointing beam on earth's uncertain roads, and we can all agree with that. The roads of earth are very uncertain. His birth held up a symbol and a sign. His human self, like a translucent cloak, covered the all-wise who leads the unseeing world. Powerful. Affiliated to cosmic space and time. Now, he is obviously affiliated to that cosmic space and time. And we speak of the Holocaust of the divine. It is the descent of the avatar into earth. Affiliated to cosmic space and time, and paying here God's debt to earth and man. Now, that's an interesting line to discuss, because in the next canto, we are going to read this quote. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit so we understand more of this paying here God's debt. A mutual debt binds man to the Supreme. His nature we must put on as he put ours. We are sons of God and must be even as he. His human portion we must grow divine. Our life is a paradox with God for key. So that's a little ahead of time, but I wanted to share it with you. And paying here God's debt to earth and man. A greater sonship was his divine right. Now that sonship, Mother talks, well, she doesn't use that word, but if you look on the Samadhi, you will see what she says about Sri Aurobindo. And I will read it. 9th of December, when they placed his body in the Samadhi. And at that time, Mother said to Udar, make one for me also. Make a place for me as well. And Udar said, absolutely not, Mother. And she looked at him, and she just looked at him. He said, yes, Mother. to thee who hast been the material envelope of our Master, to thee our infinite gratitude. Before thee, who hast done so much for us, who hast worked, struggled, suffered, hoped, endured so much. Now that's the first part. Before thee, who hast willed all, attempted all, prepared, achieved all for us, before thee we bow down and implore that we may never forget, even for a moment, all we owe to thee. 2 more lines and I'll break for tonight. And someone could perhaps, would you read the whole thing we started? From the first line of the canto. Although consenting to mortal ignorance. Now, this is very interesting because why does the divine have to consent to mortal ignorance? Well, when that descent into birth occurs, there is always some mortal ignorance. And Sri Aurobindo had to spend all those years in England without knowing his own language. His father insisted that he never be taught any of Indian languages. He had to come back and then realize that India had to be free, so he became a warrior for that cause until he got the word, go to Pondicherry. And why was Pondicherry chosen? It's very interesting. Because it was a French colony and he could hide out there. I've been to the house he lived in, and the lady was Tamil lady, very, very kind lady. She let us go in, and they showed where there was a little space about that big covered with a board, and that's where they would send his food up. And they were always on the lookout for the British. So, although consenting to mortal ignorance, his knowledge shared the light ineffable. And we'll take up light next time because it's a capital L here.